Welcome to Generation AI, the show where we explore how AI is reshaping our generation. I'm Derek Stahl. On the show today, AI surveillance on campus. More schools are adopting new technology to spot weapons, but how effective is it? And should states start making this technology mandatory? Plus, a lot of people say they don't like AI written stories, but research is actually finding the opposite. Is AI now at risk of putting creative humans out of business? Let's get right to the headlines. A small city in Arizona is putting artificial intelligence to work solving police cases. The Eloy Police Department is now the first agency in the country to partner with a company called eSleuth. They offer software that essentially gives investigators thousands of virtual detectives, digging through case files around the clock, looking for connections, suggesting leads. This software scans every case and then hands detectives a to-do list. What's been done, what hasn't been done, what they should do next. Some critics worry about using AI in this way, noting that an AI mistake could point police to the wrong person. The department says humans still make every policing decision. OpenAI is tightening security around how it trains and tests its models. This is in response to that bizarre hack last month when OpenAI agents broke out of their test environment, reached the internet, and hacked another AI company called Hugging Face. OpenAI says it paused some training for 2 weeks after that incident. The company says its new safeguards are designed to better contain these models, monitor what they're doing, and alert humans when something goes wrong. The company says they've got a new 30-minute rule. When a red flag pops up in training and they can't prove it was a false alarm in 30 minutes, they pause the model. For many Americans, dating these days involves a lot of swiping on apps. But some startup companies are trying to remove the frustration of finding matches on dating apps using AI. In San Francisco, this 22-year-old is about to go on a date through an app called Ditto. It's a new startup that eliminates swiping altogether. You can chat with an AI concierge about what you're looking for, and Ditto handles the rest. So every Wednesday at 7 p.m., a text arrives with a match and a full pre-planned itinerary. Yeah, they plan where you go and what you're doing. All you have to do is show up. The app's founder says they have already facilitated over 80,000 dates so far. But are they taking some of the romance out of love?
I think the most romantic part of human connection is meeting in person. I would say we're actually trying to push people to experience that faster.
And there are other dating apps doing this as well. Iris and SciMatch jumping into the AI matching game. Coming up, can we trust AI for school security? We'll take a look at the latest tech embedded in scanners and cameras and talk with an expert about just how reliable these systems are when Generation AI continues. Welcome back to Generation AI. Traditionally, school security cameras have been most useful after something goes wrong. But with the persistent threat of school shootings, a growing number of schools are using artificial intelligence to turn those cameras into an early warning system. Companies like Zero Eyes use AI to scan security cameras for guns in hundreds of school districts. When the AI spots a potential weapon, the alert gets sent to a human to review it. And then that human can quickly call 911 if needed. A survey by Education Week a few months ago found a quarter of school districts now use these AI-powered security cameras to detect threats or fights. Here in Arizona, Tolleson Union High School District uses similar AI technology. But as these systems expand, we're also seeing their limitations on display. Elisa Mula is a security consultant who advises schools on technology and physical security. Elisa, welcome to Generation AI.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. So what is the overall advantage of having a system like this with AI over, let's say, having a security officer in a room watching a bunch of cameras?
Well, it's great if you have a security officer watching the cameras and being diligent in terms of answering all the alarms that are coming into the system. But the large majority of schools or different types of institutions that have the ability to have somebody fully monitoring the system 24/7, it's very, very low, the chances that they have that. So having an AI that sort of combs through a lot of the noise or the data that's coming in, the alarms, while the officer or the person in that responsible charge is making the decisions that only a human should make, that's sort of the critical piece of layering both the human intelligence with the artificial intelligence.
How expensive is this solution, generally speaking? I mean, because the surveillance cameras are already there, is adding AI relatively inexpensive, or are there more sort of infrastructure factors than people might assume?
Well, it's definitely on a case by case, depending on what the school has implemented as far as technology goes. There's, in most cases, with video surveillance, access control, panic alarms, all of these different independent systems, at this point in time, most of them have a feature that you can turn on at a relatively inexpensive fee. And usually it's just, a software toggle that they're turning on. So, depending on if the school needs to implement a whole new technology because they have an older technology in place, that could become a little bit more costly. But there are workarounds. There's definitely integrations and different systems out there that can supplement what they have existing to fit in any budget. Additionally, there are so many resources out there from a grant perspective for schools to implement these newer upgraded technologies. So just because a school doesn't necessarily have the infrastructure in place, there are definitely opportunities for them to make those upgrades through things like government grants.
Interesting. So it certainly sounds powerful for a school to say, hey, we've got AI-powered surveillance cameras protecting your kids. But there have been some notable mistakes or errors. And we have video here of police in Baltimore, Maryland, surrounding a group of students with their guns drawn. This was in October, after there was an AI alert that there was a gun detected. The system they were using at that school was called OmniAlert. The officers searched the students. They discovered that what the AI had flagged as a gun was actually just a bag of Dorito chips. Then over in Nashville, they had kind of the opposite problem. An AI system failed to spot a real gun that was really used in an actual shooting that resulted in a death. And the company says in that case, the gun simply wasn't visible to the cameras that were running the software. So what do incidents like those tell you about the reliability and overall the value of these systems?
Well, there is a huge misconception that because it's AI, it's artificial intelligence, it's kind of like foolproof. We can just let this run on the system and we don't necessarily need a human component to digest the information and make the important calls that they need to make. In no situation should we let AI run and make security related decisions like the ones you just mentioned. That's why having that layered approach, the human intelligence with the AI is only a tool. You need to have the person who is experienced and can, understand the environment in a way that AI cannot. You need that person to make the call in situations like you just showed, these examples, to use the information that AI is providing, but also make the educated decisions that only a human can.
Yeah, you need a human in the review loop, and you also need
100%.
a lot of cameras, too, that are running these AI systems. And if you don't have the cameras that are covering the right angles and the right spots, they can't see the guns that are coming in. Now, a lot of districts are also turning to another type of AI security. They're using these AI weapons scanners at entrances. They look like magnetometers or metal detectors, but they are a little bit different in terms of the technology. Companies like Evolve, Extract are some of the vendors out there. However, some school leaders have complained about a high rate of false positives with these things. In fact, in 2024, the FTC filed a complaint against Evolve, alleging that its scanners were failing to detect weapons in schools and instead were flagging things like laptops and binders and water bottles and the like. What do you make of this technology and the way that it works?
Well, I do think that the tech has come a long way. We're very familiar with all of the brands that you've mentioned on this call, and they are constantly, providing upgrades and, really just, no pun intended, but evolving the overall technology. But again, we go back to the idea that this is not a set it and forget it kind of thing. AI is not a problem solver. It is a tool. So any institution that is setting up a magnetometer, an evolve system, or anything else, running AI on their cameras and thinking, well, it's just going to do the work for us. That is the wrong way of thinking. This is merely just a supplement to the overall policy and procedure. Policy and procedure, even though there's really no technology involved in writing policy and procedure, that is often the most important piece to every security system. So the AI component is really just an add-on, a tool to supplement that policy and procedure, and the human is really executing on the policy and procedure.
Do you have an opinion at this stage as to whether schools are better off using old school magnetometers or trying for these AI entry systems?
I do think it is on a case-by-case basis. I will tell you that the large majority of the customers that we work with, that we support to either design their systems or we're helping them getting grant funding to implement some of these systems, the large majority of them are moving towards the more cutting-edge technology, some of the ones that you just showed here. I hate to encourage people to invest in older technology. I don't necessarily think that that's a good practice, but there are unique circumstances where there has to be a blend of older and newer technology for specific reasons. There is no one size fits all, but the trend has been with most of our customers to invest in the newer technology that you're mentioning here.
Now, on a policy level, some states have been considering putting in mandates that schools have to add AI-powered security systems. Arizona, where we are, has not done any mandates like that. What do you think of a mandate? Is that better or worse ultimately for the students?
I love this question. We have a lot of states that we work with, state representatives that we've talked to about this specifically. I've seen some of the legislation that's coming down, and I don't think it's written properly in most cases. I think what needs to happen, and this is, when we're working with any institution or even a community, we recommend that the stakeholders have the autonomy and they make their decisions for their specific needs, their community, the people, the assets that they're protecting. And then there's a larger collaborative effort with state and local officials, law enforcement, first responders, but everyone has the accountability and responsibility to maintain their own system and decide what works best for them. So when we see legislation that is mandating, you must use this type of technology, again, there is no one size fits all. And that, I think, is the wrong path to go down. There should be a security life safety standard, just the way there is a fire life safety standard. However, it has to be written around that sort of autonomy and responsibility of the individual institution.
Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of nuance when it comes to security.
A lot of nuance.
Yeah. Well, Elisa Mula is a security consultant. Lisa, thank you so much for being on Generation AI.
Thank you.
Still much more to come here on Generation AI. Coming up next, has AI gotten better at writing than humans? We've got the findings of a new study and what it suggests about art itself. That's when Generation AI continues. When it comes to creative writing, we humans may have some competition. A new study suggests people can't tell when a short story is written by AI, and they actually prefer what the AI comes up with. Researchers from Villanova asked nearly 1,700 people to read one of 6 short stories. 3 of the short stories came from published human authors, 3 were written by AI. The readers were also told who wrote the story, a human or an AI. However, half the time the researchers were lying. And it turns out the label mattered. Stories that were labeled human got higher marks, no matter who actually wrote them. And here's the twist. The AI-generated stories were rated higher quality and more absorbing than the human ones. And the highest rated stories of all were the AI stories that were falsely labeled as human. Kind of a double whammy there. And in a follow-up study, people were asked to guess which story came from the AI, which story came from a human, and they were no better than flipping a coin. They couldn't really tell. So what does this mean for creative writing, for our collective tastes, and for the stories we tell ourselves about the stories we are reading? Joining me now is the founding director of the Center for Science and the Imagination at Arizona State University. He's also a science fiction scholar and a former journalist for Time and Slate. Ed Finn, welcome to Generation AI.
Thank you for having me, Derek.
Thank you, Ed, for being here. So this study seems to contain kind of two separate findings here, that people preferred AI-generated stories, but they preferred stories when they thought that a human had written them. What do you make of what people are responding to in each of those cases?
Well, first of all, let's celebrate the fact that humans are still team human. And when people thought the story was written by a human, they were more likely to rate it higher and appreciate it. And I think that's fundamental to the idea of creativity and making art. So I think that's worth celebrating. One of the reasons that we engage with art is to connect with other people, and we're looking for other people. And it's interesting and ironic that we imagine AI to be human as well. You know, we're wired to look for that social connection, that emotional connection. So we use our imaginations to do that. So I think that is really that is what jumps out at me from that result, that people are more likely to like a story that they think is written by a human, whether or not it was written by a human. And the second finding, that we can't tell, well, that's not that surprising. We've been in this uncanny valley for several years now, where it is getting increasingly difficult to distinguish AI output from human output. There's this old idea of the Turing test, can a machine effectively trick people into thinking that it's a human? And it's been years, and in some cases, a few limited instances, decades, where people have been able to construct chatbots that could trick people into thinking that they were human. So, it's a brave new world. It's pretty exciting and terrifying. I think that the thing I hang on to is we still need to create. I think it's a fundamental human practice. And again, it's something that we do to connect with other people. And what I'd love to talk more about is what happens when we live in a world where machines are increasingly able to give us exactly what we think we want. Is that actually a world we want to live in? Yeah,
well, let's talk about that, because I'm in a world of journalism where it's my job to produce content that I hope people like, but in a world where it is easy for the average person to create something pretty good and pretty compelling. Does that lower the value of writers and content creators?
So I think that we are going to come to appreciate authentic human creativity even more, but the floor is dropping, and it is incredibly easy for anyone to push a button and generate a short story or a screenplay or a news report. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those products are going to be more compelling or better. One way that I think about this is when you're a high school student and you're reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or you're reading William Shakespeare, you're not reading it because it's incredibly easy and necessarily even that it's absorbing. In some ways, you're reading it because it's a little hard. There's some friction there, and that is part of the learning process and a way to challenge yourself and step into somebody else's head. This is what art is all about, is letting us escape the boundaries of our own experience and experience other things. So if you have a machine that's just giving you exactly what it thinks you want, and it's going to feel comfortable and safe and right down the middle, or is this blended average of what billions of people have done before, we're not exploring that bigger possibility space. We're not challenging ourselves as the audience of art or as the creators of art. So we're going to need to embrace that. But I think the economics of this situation are really fraught for creators. When you think about, most writers cannot make their living as professional authors, right? They have to have a day job, or they're writing in some other context, they're copy writers, or do you think about in the context of, say, illustration and design? And a lot of those jobs are disappearing because the people who are hiring that work don't really care that much about the human element. They just want to get to the bottom line as quickly as possible. And so the good enough version of AI content is easy for them to say yes to. So the question we need to ask is, how do we create structures of value for this kind of creative output? And maybe it's a little bit like musicians and live concerts. Music is another industry that's wrestling with the impact of AI, and you can go to a song generator and you can write yourself a pop song in a couple of minutes. But when we listen to music and we fall in love with music, we do that because we're also falling in love with the creators and the other people, the community around that music. So we need to really examine our relationship with art as something that's not just about a product that we're buying, but it's a community that we're participating in together.
Yeah, I'm interested also in sort of the idea of the apprenticeship problem, where, I think there's this idea that great writers become great writers because they spend a lot of time as bad writers, and then they become mediocre writers, and through practice, they get better and better and better. But if AI can instantly make any sort of mediocre writing pretty good, do we risk eliminating the future great writers out there?
I think that's a possibility. All of this is really in how we set these systems up and how we implement them. And I'm seeing increasing conversation in the idea of Socratic learning, where instead of the default being, hey, ChatGPT, write me a short story, you have to write the first draft. You take the first step, you begin with your own ideas, and then maybe you get feedback. And that AI system functions more like an editor asking questions. And there's always this slippery slope because it is so tempting to just push the button. And as a college teacher, I can't imagine what it's like to be a college student right now or a high school student where this button is always there. You can always push it to just do your homework for you. But it really is that apprenticeship, as you were saying, is really important. And we need to invite people and remind people of the way you get there is through doing the work. And by the way, I think that reading is like that too. You start off as not being a great reader, and you have to read challenging things in order to become a better reader. Literacy is, in some ways, really a lifelong project. And we keep learning and changing, and we come back to books, and now they've changed somehow because we've changed when we're reading them. So all of that, I think, gets swept under the rug when we pretend that this stuff can just be automated and appified. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm making it up. And you just make it into something where you push a button and magically it happens. That takes away all of the human experience. And the last point on this, we're sort of eating the seed corn right now, because the more of this AI generated content, and sometimes let's just call it AI slop, that we put out there, the more that content is going to get fed back into new models, the harder it is to find authentic and weird, human expression and creativity that all of these models desperately need to keep growing and improving.
Yeah, when you have AI trained on AI, which is already the average of outputs, we're getting more and more and more, I wonder, towards the average. You read a lot of science fiction. Science fiction has spent decades imagining machines that become more human, but I wonder about sort of the inverse. Are you worried at all that AI, as it becomes more human, could sort of change what the humans learn to like?
I really worry about that. And you mentioned journalism before. We've been having this conversation in the context of creative writing, but there's no reason from the technical AI standpoint that we couldn't be having it about journalism. And imagine a near future where you turn on the news and the news is exactly what the AI thinks you want to hear. In some ways, social media and the algorithmic world that we live in is already pretty far down that path. And that gets really disturbing, because then we're losing a shared sense of reality, and we're losing the friction and the difficulty of contending with people who disagree with us, news that isn't the news that we want to hear, but maybe we need to hear. So all of this stuff is really tricky. And I think that in the context of creative writing and imagination, what happens is we're outsourcing our own innate ability to imagine the world. Writing, all of these art forms are distillations of human experience. And there's this kind of magical alchemy where a great writer writes something and then a reader can experience a version of that thing. Yeah. It's amazing that happens. And when we outsource key elements of that to machines, there's no there's no personhood, there's no creative agency. And so we do all of this work to sort of conjure up a fake person that's not there, just like with the Turing test. But it's like playing tennis with nothing, right? And at a certain point, that is really dangerous to one's sense of self and your sense of your sort of standing and position in the world. And you see this AI psychosis moments where people get really lost in these story worlds, imaginary relationships that they construct with AI. So it can be dangerous. And I think the first step is to have a strong sense of what I call self-imagination. You really need to know who you are and what you're trying to do with these systems if you're going to successfully collaborate with them. Because we're in this, three wishes genie situation where you're going to get exactly what you wish for, and it turns out that's not really a good thing.
Yeah, we don't want to wish for a future where we are getting less and less creative. Let's avoid that together. Ed Finn, this was a fascinating discussion. Ed's the founding director of the Center for Science and the Imagination at Arizona State University. Ed, I hope you come back on again. This was great.
I would love to. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you at home for watching Generation AI. You can find us weekly streaming on AZ Family Plus and over at azfamily.com/GenAI. We'll be back with another episode next week. We'll see you in the future.